what got some sort of antenna on their top.
Hello, denizens of the realm. Welcome. This is the Congregational Church in Windsor County in the town of Chester. Built in 1829, we are told that most of it is original. However, the clock that we don't see pictured here was installed in... excuse me. That clock right there. That's the one. We're told that the clock was installed in 1916. We're also told that the interior was redesigned in 1947 by Raymond Austin of Weston, Vermont. Other than that, that's all we're given. 3 doors and a tower. Make of it what you will, folks. There's also some stained glass somewhere in there that we're told is probably not original either. So, if you're there and you find it, be sure to tell it that it's a fake. This is the Earl House, State Route 103, also in Chester, also known as the Red House, built by Xavier Earl, whose initials are marked on the chimney. In 1809, it was owned by a Mr. Henry, implying that the majority of it, at least the lean-to section there, was erected in 1793. And the dating is from the deeds, and there was a little bit of an addition added in 1796. Apparently, the owner has a picture, not pictured here, of the original house. And this information comes to us in 1959. Not quite sure what we've got going on here. Flagstone on display or something. Thank you. Very vigilant. Can't get mad at the guard dogs, especially not regarding. You can get mad for other things, like when they eat your leather jacket. This is the Dr. Edson House on North Street, also in Chester. Built in 1833 for Dr. Edson. The present owner at the Stone Village Inn here, we're told, is Eugene O'Neill. Wonder if this is the same Eugene O'Neill playwright that we read about in an upcoming unreleased video, but already recorded, obviously, about playwright that settled in Contra Costa County in California. That'd be interesting crossover here, but I don't know. Eugene O'Neill, that name just could be. It could just be a name that more than one people have, which is very probable. But at one point it was an inn. That's all we know. And that's Eugene O'Neill up on the fireplace. Just like an ottoman. We got our usual two little friends down here, you know, holding it down as we see a rather interesting half-submerged foundation there. One wonders, doesn't one? And we're looking at 2 different properties, I'm sorry. The one with the ottoman was the Dr. Edson House. This is the Granville Balding House, a place called Chester Depot, and it's currently, or at least, I guess 70 years ago, was a antique shop. Told it's a different type from the rest of the unusual stone houses in Chester Depot. Built as a moccasin shop with a tannery just behind, Granville Spalding being the original owner, and the erection was 1838. The builder was probably, we're told, the Clark brothers. Built most of the stone houses in Chester. So many brothers as builders, you know. In California, we had that survey. Literally every other property felt like had a Bacon brothers or Baker brothers or as the builder. Here we've got the Clark brothers. And perhaps it's so. Perhaps there are many brothers that build back brothers. That comes from an article on all stone houses in Chester Depot, by the way, in a Bellows Falls Time, dated 1950 article. Also from the Vermont Life Autumn episode or issue in 1950 as well. The stairway was moved, we're told. First floor was the shop. There were 4 bedrooms and kind of an interesting recessed little entranceway there, isn't it? And it's kind of a cool wallpaper. Strangely kind of modern looking wallpaper, huh? Almost has a Stafford quality to it. Milk glass antiques. Yep, the old Andines. Oh man, I love these old lamps here. Grandma used to have these, the little prisms that dangle. Super cool, although it was a little more modern. I think that's just a candle. Still, those old-timey goods, nothing like them. Winifred, back when people had class and dignity. I can recall when the Million-Man March was full of men wearing 3-piece suits, cummerbunds, neckties, bowler hats as far as the eye can see. My God, it was glorious. This is the Hatch House in Norwich, in Windsor County, Vermont. Said to be the first frame house in the area and one of possibly only 3 18th century houses surviving in the area. Remarkable feat. 1773, date of erection. Mr. Joseph Hatch, we're told. While the porch is ratted on later, structure's in sound condition and very well maintained. These little New England residences, also very, hate to use the word, but quaint, how they're often described to the outside eye. Vermont, an interesting history. One of the few, well, officially, although there's some controversy about that, but officially, at least recognized, Vermont is one of the first states that had its own nation, its own currency, its own republic, while banning slavery of adults. There was no such restriction on child slavery or child labor. An odd place. Probably to protect farmers, I imagine. Sometimes those facts get thrown around like child labor. I don't know if it counts as labor if you're helping your parents or your family or on a farm. I don't know. People are funny. History is always to be viewed as the way we view modern day news, really. I mean, that's where most of the sources are. If you are going to base history on articles of newspapers and magazines, like much of this survey is, well, newspapers and magazines today are some of the most dishonest, untrustworthy material that we have, so it's hard to take anything at its face value. It's always an interpretation, something that sometimes I think gets overlooked sometimes in the academic world, where a lot of times history is taken as factual information, and it's stories. I mean, stories happen, different viewpoints. Three people can watch the same event and see it's increased exponentially, so it's always a struggle finding what's real. Oh, but we try. That we do. That we do. This is the Norwich Congregational Church. A lot of these congregational churches here in the old Vermont, which is aptly named. I believe that's just sort of a bastardization of the French words for Green Mountain, right? Vermont, showing how really affiliated that area is with the French / Canadian neighbors who often share towns and sometimes even share building. Border being so randomly drawn right down the middle of places, at least the ones that aren't based on geographical features like the river that separates them from Hampshire. But regardless, it was moved. There were two congregations. There was an argument about it, and eventually the other building was sold and razed to the ground. You know, it's interesting, the word means both things. If to actually specify, raised with a Z or raised with an AIS. It's like poorly designed language sometimes. Maybe by design. You ever think about that? Sure you do. I'm sure that you do. The interior looking lovely, actually. Much in the shape you would expect from every courthouse and church of the day. Followed the same layout. Buildings almost interchangeable, really. Courthouses and churches sometimes. These are photogrammetric images from the summers of 1980. Since these are not reproducible except with special permission, there's a reference print and film copy negative made. That's what these are here. Not reproducible except with special permission. I wonder how many of those that they have that they don't allow people to produce. Interesting. Pictures are even in here. And I see now, while most of these things are available, most of the photographs we look at to some extent, my methods for retrieving them were not conventional, let's say. And so I'm always curious when I find out that there are other libraries exist within our government archives that are being withheld from the people. I just, even if they're just dusty old pictures of old buildings, I just can't help but get the itch, Anyway, let's keep it moving here. Funny little survey, this Vermont one. You can tell it's one of the earliest ones. And actually, it looks like it's going to be one of the smallest, too. Which I was surprised by the length of, I would have thought Rhode Island would have been smaller, but based on the preliminary investigation, looks like Vermont will be shorter than the average, at least as far as this survey goes. But, it doesn't necessarily mean anything. It doesn't necessarily mean that there's less historic properties. It just means in this particular documentation. Olcott Johnson House in the old Norwich Center is what you're looking at here. Built by Mr. Peter Olcott, prominent in the early history of the town and the Lieutenant Governor of Vermont. We don't have Lieutenant Governors around my neck of the woods. Mr. Olcott was one of the town's most prominent citizens, as I said. He came here in 1772 or 73. There's a committee report concerning the location of the church which refers to Peter Olcott's house, and since he's already been in town about a year, according to page 64 of said document. Oh, I guess I didn't tell you what the document was, so I take the said back. Early Houses of Norwich, Vermont is the name of the document. It was published in 1938, and we're told it's quite possible the house was built as early as 1772. Since he was a man of wealth, influence, and mature years, he probably would have built a fine residence soon after his arrival in town. He also kept a store near his residence during the Revolution. Mrs. Milton Coleman, at present living in the house, believes it was built for Peter's son in 1780 and that the Peter Olcott house stood near the present one which was torn down 50 or 60 years ago. After a careful examination of available evidence, this seems improbable. Mills was only 6 years old in 1780, the son, and it was unlikely his father would have built such a fine residence for so youthful a gentleman. It's funny, calling a 6-year-old a gentleman. It's very kind. Moreover, after Mills graduated from Dartmouth in the year 1800, he settled in Hanover while the Peter Olcott family continued to be present in Norwich for many years, and there's no available reference to two Olcott houses, or no sign of any but the present house on the old map. A little dispute there. This is notes by Mrs. Albert Johnson.
With the removal of old landmarks and the death of those who knew the locations of road and buildings, there is the possibility of vanishing knowledge that would be interesting to preserve. Since my father was a man of the center, it seems fitting to pass on some information relevant to the center with the story of the Olcotts. Therefore, we're told that Peter Olcott was not one of the original proprietors of Norwich. He came here following the death of two sons in 1773 from Windsor, Connecticut. He was born in Bolton, Connecticut. There's
some Dartmouth students under the direction of Professor Hugh Morrison, and who published, under their study, it was published that this house was built in 1773, the year Peter Olcott came from Connecticut. It is one of the purposes of this paper to refute that information, says Mrs. Albert Johnson. She says,
my father believed the Olcott house was built on the knoll in what is now a field belonging to Mrs. Clapp. A rose bush grew up every year and blossomed by the spot that father believed to have been by the doorstep of the first Olcott house. Later, Mr. J. Hartley Nelson plowed out a timber there that was probably one of the first Olcott house.
In the History of Vermont by Goddard and Partridge, it's stated that the first meeting house was built about 20 rods northwest from Captain Peter Olcott's dwelling house on the north side of the highway. This house is much more than that distance from the center where the meeting house was built. There was a row of granite posts around the corner of the field, which probably marked the edge of their yard, and on which were wooden post supports for a picket fence. This summer, Mrs. Clapp had them removed. More recently, Mrs. Butler, who's done much research concerning the Olcotts, has found references to Martha occupying the home after her parents lived elsewhere, probably with Mills at Hanover, at what is today known as the Choate House.
See, I was told that this house was built the same year that the Choate House was built. That would be 1785. But if this house was built, as my father often told, by Peter Olcott for his profligate son, Mills, it might have been a few years later as Mills graduated from Dartmouth in 1790.
A large two-story house, her father describes, Miss Albert Johnson's father. There was an entrance on the west side, so that one might be covered as one got into a vehicle for riding. The woodshed was on the east. There's a row of dentals. The house has a large central chimney. As was characteristic, there are 4 fireplaces. 2 of them have been bricked up. There was a large fireplace where the cooking was probably done. So, this is very interesting. When Albert Johnson, this woman's father, excavated the cellar, he found ashes on the ground under where the fireplace was located. The water supply was furnished from a well under the corner of the house.
My father always called the room above it, where our water barrel and sink are, as the well room. Peter Olcott died in Hanover at the home of his son in 1808. Mills died in 1845. Research done by Miss Butler recalls the probable fact that this house was the home of Roswell Olcott, who lived near his father's home and attended business for him. Planted poplars that grew well here. He was active in town affairs. He was the town representative to the General Assembly. He went to Canada and managed business investments of Mills, who had bought from his father-in-law some undeveloped land in Brum. The farmers rented until date.
And then the date here is smudged out. There's a stone in the Meeting House Hill Cemetery denoting the death of Martha S., daughter of Daniel Johnson. Whether this or another sorrow came to the Johnson family, they sold the farm.
There were many apple trees on the farm. I can remember 6 or 7 here in the front yard. There was an old, very tall poplar tree to the west side and a fir in front of the house. I remember my grandmother. My father would point out the tops of those trees and say that's where we lived. There were 2 large barns, probably built by the Olcotts. I believe Grandfather Coleman was born in Hanover. There's
no house to mark the place, and the land is owned by the water company. So this woman goes on and on to talk about the Coleman brothers and what they did, selling lumber and milk, paying off the mortgage on the farm, her uncle dying at age 37, and she's got a lot of, her father was a deacon in the church. So it's interesting that later on these notes sort of dwindle off into saying things like many experiences omitted, A and I married here, letter from Aunt Isabel recalling pleasant visits with her uncle, father died February, we bought farm, mother died, electricity, October 1940, brick wall from cellar up under windows of first floor. So this is very, very interesting to me. House has stood through 2 hurricanes, some scars of the second one remain, artesian well, and all of this, I'm sorry to leave it on that picture for so long, but all of this leads to a history, that is just simply not told by just these few pictures. You get a strange paneled wall with a door that seems sort of cut out of the wall. This paneling, it's a massive house. Looks definitely has been added onto over the years. But what conflicting stories. How the house came to be, who lived there. It's very odd that the history seems, and it just goes to show you that in this survey, you have this one story, and then you've got a woman coming along disputing it and giving facts and stories. And so she grew up here. She obviously wrote 10 pages about this to dispute this article that had come out and gives anecdotal evidence about digging up timbers, brick walls under the cellar floor, history that doesn't match the story. This stuff, this one woman's account happens to be published in this survey, but one wonders how many times these surveys get things wrong. A couple students at Dartmouth come in, do some preliminary investigation, ask a few questions, look at some old magazines that are possibly incorrect, and then it gets published, and then that reference material is then later used in a survey as if it's empirical data and fact and a story's told about a property. And if it wasn't for some woman who just happens to come across this article and say, "Nuh-uh, I lived here," and give, 10 pages of family detail, without that woman doing that, we would just accept that. And that's very uncommon for an article like this to be disputed, for that dispute to actually be printed in this survey. It goes to show you the integrity, at least of the day. Nowadays, they wouldn't even, first of all, most people aren't even out there challenging things like that or stories. Most elderly folks, well, at least in my family, they just shake their head and kind of keep to themselves and say, that ain't how it was. And they might tell anyone that's listening, but they're not going to go out and 10-page letters. And so you can see within even one generation how easy it is for history to actually get swallowed up. And no one has any clue. No one has any clue if there's 2 houses there, 1 house there. Who built it and why and where. And this is just one little property, one little rural area in Vermont. It just goes to show you that we really don't know anything. And the conceit of knowledge, the conceit of experts who consistently get things wrong. For how many years were we told Bitcoin was a scam and worthless? And the people that held on to it from the beginning are just like, man, they didn't know anything. Most of us were just super young dudes that just took a chance on something that seemed cool, that seemed better. And for years we're told we're idiots and liars and wasting it's a sham and gambling. And look where it is now. And now people are millionaires because of it. And never because an expert ever confirmed what the common man knows. The conceit of people who think that they know. Look at these world experts. For how many years have we've been told Russia's out of missiles for 2-3 years by the world's biggest publications, and there's just no accountability. How many times can a newspaper article lie to you, for a newspaper or publication lie to you before you say no? How many times can the New York Times or the Washington Post tell you absolute fabrications and none of it turns out to be true before you tune them out? Apparently infinite. Apparently our memories are just so small and we're like goldfish. But some people don't forget. How many times can your family members or significant other lie to you before you stop trusting them? I would say that number is probably less than, it's probably just a handful, I would imagine, if you're sensible. So why do we allow these experts to be just historically wrong about everything constantly? It's amazing to me, the games that we are played, and to work against that indoctrination that there are experts in fields that you just can't dispute, and the arrogance of people to think that they know and that they can predict the future. It's just baffling to me. Nobody knows jack. And the people that can admit that are the people that you should trust, more than people who are puffed up on their own arrogance. And just these tiny little anecdotal stories like that. That's just kind of a nothing story about one little property, a little rural property in Vermont. Approximately no one's thinking about in this moment of time, except for me, maybe. Sorry to go off on a weird tangent there, but that kind of stuff that you just find buried in these surveys is just it's just fascinating. And unless you're pouring through these old documents, you never find it. Anyway, sorry the visual during that whole time was boring, but the property only had 2 photographs with it. So this is not that property. This is the Wethersfield Congregational Church and Town Hall in the Wethersfield Center in Perkinsville, Windsor County, Vermont. Now I feel more revved up and high energy. It's weird what makes you tick. Built in 1821 at a cost of $4,000, we're told. There's a bronze tablet placed on the building in 1946. The first meeting house, we're told, was erected in 1786 and burned in 1821. Burned was, seems like it was intentional. I don't say it was destroyed by fire. I guess it sounded the same. Anyway, it burned after 40 years, and the present structure was built during the very notable ministry of Reverend James Converse. 1802 to 1839, Reverend. 1761, this is what the bronze plaque says. Town chartered Governor Benning Wentworth of New Hampshire to 62 proprietors, mainly of New Haven, Connecticut. 1772, first town meeting. 1772, new charter from Governor Tryon of New York to 22 proprietors. 1775, Congregational Church organized. There's a lot to write on this bronze plaque. It goes on to talk about Reverend James Treadway being the minister, Reverend Dan Foster being the minister, parsonage built, etc., etc. The belfry in 1787. 1821, the wooden meeting house was burned. 1821, the present brick meeting house was built with square pews and a bell and a high pulpit and a belfry at the total cost of $4,000. Remodeled for public worship in the upper part. In 1866, Civil War monument erected and maple grove planted. Okay, you got all that? Good. Octagonal 2-story towers seem to be a thing of the day. That's as close as we get, and that's all the pictures we get. No pictures of the interior dome or anything cool like that. So that's a little bit of a bummer. These, by the way, are cast iron stovepipes, which apparently were how the building drew heat with there's 2 furnaces on either end. Part of the Mission 66 program was the restoration for this place. And of course, shocking that it was a wood and then burnt and then suddenly made of brick magically after that. Rebuilt the same year. Well, that's a recycled tale that we see and here, time after time again. And maybe there's some truth to it sometimes. There's definitely also some rather dubious stories around it. Give one cause for suspicion. This is a representative house with unusual detail because of its third-floor ballroom and its proximity to the old Crown Point Road. It thought to have been served as a tavern at some point. This is the Warren Child House. A third-floor ballroom. Possibly a tavern at one point. Well, sounds like a really happening place up there in the hill. Built for Luther Warren, whose father came to Wethersfield from Massachusetts in 1785. We're told it was partially destroyed by fire. The entire building was demolished fall 1959 as part of the Springfield Dam project. The site of the house is in the lake bed of the dam and will be covered with water during times when the dam is used for flood control. Okay. Large brick house was in sound, well-maintained condition until it was demolished in 1959, with only some of the woodwork and hardware saved by the owners. There were cellar walls that were partially plastered. It was made of brick, and the entryway was large cut blocks of granite that were stacked. What a tragedy. Third floor was one large single room known as the ballroom. So there's the ballroom, I'm assuming, by the large singleness of it, and that window, and possibly the lighting and the benches on the walls. Several of the original fireplaces were closed up, we're told, including those on the third floor. What a tragedy. We're told the outbuildings burned several years before the house was demolished. That's not the same house, so look away. And that is just too bad. Yeah, you get these big arched doorways and you just wonder if they were designed this way or if this wooden stuff was just added later. Certainly looks like that brick's got some old weathering on it, and it certainly looks as if this could extend deeper into the ground. Actually, it could be taller, and this would just be another window because you see the same shape here, these bays. And I'm not sure why you would go to the unnecessary length of putting this keystone in here and doing this brickwork, only to then brick it back in. I don't know. That is an interesting foundation. Stacked brick here underneath this. Stacked stone. Doesn't look very natural at all, does it? So what is this? A retaining wall? We'll never know because now it conveniently rests on the bottom of a lake somehow, even though we're on a hill. Strange what's in the bottom of these lakes. You know, I was out with some friends once celebrating Fage, which is the French acronym for 4th of July. And we were out on the lake, one of the various man-made lakes. Well, one of the lakes, some of the lakes that result from the large dams out here. And swimming out to what appeared to be the center of the area we were in, suddenly we hit this ledge where you can suddenly stand, appeared to be, based on the feel of it, to be ceramic tile. Like a big platform of ceramic tile that suddenly, after swimming in water that was over your head deep, suddenly we hit this platform, and now we're standing in chest-high water, you know, on a ceramic tile floor in the middle of this lake. And at the time, we just thought, what the hell is this? And carried on with the party, standing around out there, and it was a blast, but made no sense. And looking back, it's like, well, yeah, of course. Some town or something was flooded. Some buildings were that this reservoir from these dams that created this, and apparently it's very common in California as well. But it's just interesting when you have different eyes and you look back at your past, how many times you come across things that make no sense, concrete chunks with rebar out in the middle of the forest, and just strange things, you know, that just let you know that we're really just probing around with a flashlight in a dark room in this realm and really have no clue as to what came before. We got stories, and that's about it. This here is I feel like I'm being very tangential and leaving you hanging as far as the visuals go, so I apologize for that. But these are, you know, these are live. These are essentially live streams without me going live. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm just doing this in real time, bro. That's how I prefer it. Unused, we're told, is this house, which is it's a farmstead built by Nathaniel Stoughton. That's what I thought. The old Stoughton farmstead, built in 1788. Yes, sir. They removed a large central chimney, which you can see pictured here, in 1900 to give added space for closets and a bathroom. Front windows were replaced with larger ones that they were cut into the wainscot. The house was moved in 1959 because of the Springfield Dam project on the Black River. The farm was originally located northeast of Perkinsville, and wow, what a strange way to build that into the hill like that. Anyway, one of these photographs is from 1900, probably that one will be my guess. See, nestled in the hills here, why they would probably want to use this area as a water reservoir if they were going to dam up the river to sell our own power and water back to us at what once was free. Man, so many dams in America, thousands of them. I read a book recently about how the infrastructure on these dams, despite being maintained by the Army Corps of Engineers, how there's just not enough maintenance, and a lot of these dams are poised to fail because they were built all in a flurry of activity, and how many of them are poorly maintained. And I think we're seeing that sometimes when these storms roll in. Sadly, I don't think that what happened this last summer or fall is hurricane season, I guess. I don't think that's the last of it, sadly to say. The mistakes of our forebears, and that's probably just because they trusted the authorities that I have such a problem with. An early Weatherfield house, this one, the Dan Foster home, built 1785 by the Wethersfield Congregational Church as a parsonage for its first settled minister, Reverend Dan Foster. It's now owned by the Historical Society and serves as the Historical Society house. Most of this information actually comes from a bronze tablet that's on there. So someone wrote it down, someone put it on a tablet, made of bronze, and the rest of us, we just are going to go ahead and just believe that. I guess why not? Look at that. Is that brickwork above that? Or is that like thatched? Well, it looks like thatched. Not really much told about this. Let me see if I can bring up the plans here. Well, not really. We're told that the ceiling is made of plaster, but I don't see no freaking plaster. I mean, I see plaster here, but that's clearly brick. Weird. We're told the wall construction is timber frame and clapboard siding, but that looks to me like brick, at least in part, and this is clearly brick, so who knows what the freck's going on. Not even to mention a brick in this whole friggin' write-up. How do you get that wrong? Especially when you only provide 2 photographs, and one of them clearly disputes what you're saying. In any case, Fox stand-in, maybe there's something I'm missing, on Route 14 north of Royalton, and we are told this unusually large hotel, which is connected with rather historical events. It's on a stagecoach route. Jacob Fox was the builder of the Fox Stand, 1800, speculated in land and mills, opened his first hotel in 1811 and built this one in 1818. He constantly petitioned the town for permission to build a bridge over the White River, which was finally granted in 1834, increasing the importance of the route on which his hotel was built. He especially accommodated freight teamsters and cattle drovers. In 1820, he had an assessment 3 times larger than any other in town, but he later lost his fortune through injudicious investments and lawsuits. His reputation for dishonesty, which goes hand in hand with his name Fox, in my humble opinion, and maliciousness, survives in various legends ranging from his treatment of his 3 wives to a suspected murder supposed to have been committed on the 3rd floor of this building. Lafayette, during his 1825 visit to Vermont, is supposed to have stayed overnight at the Fox Stand. Treatment of 3 wives? Murder on the 3rd floor? What kind of malarkey goes on here in this rural part of Vermont? It's an unusual 2nd-story ballroom, basement, kitchen, fireplace, brick end wall parapets. You could see the strange basement, 2nd-story ballroom. So what, the 1st floor here? And then the 3rd floor is what will henceforth be known as the murder floor. Although, I don't know, that's just a kind of an accusation thrown out there, suspected murder, and I don't know. No further information about this. We're told the concrete basement floor was added by the present owner. Before that, it was just dirt. Now, why? That seems weird, right? Why would you build basement and then still leave it dirt? Wait a sec. Is this a 4th floor? If there's a basement here, 2, 3, I mean, I suppose you call this an attic, but if it's got windows, usually doesn't that imply that it's a floor? So is a ballroom here on the 2nd floor? I mean, that clearly looks like a 4-story building if we're counting the basement as a floor. So the ballroom was here and the murder was here? Odd how unclear some of this stuff is when the whole point of it existing as a survey is to be clear. So the basement has a kitchen in it. That's interesting. And of course, this write-up took place in the 1960s, so no telling what she looks like now. But it's a stunning building. I mean, from all angles, really. A stunning building. Look at that doorway. One just wonders. These look like those old, ship's lanterns. In any case, moving on to the Reverend Dan Foster house. I thought we already did that one. I think it was mentioned, but no, that's weird. We already, hold on. This one was the Dan Foster house, we were told. Okay, yeah, so this is the same house? Weird. Has the same exact call number, so something must be wrong. And that something might be me. Okay, yeah, it was me. Rolls in, this one's called. Rolls in. See how easy it is, CNN? See how easy it is, guys, to say you're wrong? You just be like, hey, guys, I was wrong. That's it. It's that simple. Integrity restored. 2.5 stories, this building, which is an inn, obviously. No, maybe it's not that obvious, but hey, that's a cool car. The Ghostbusters mobile. Maybe they're here investigating Slimer's return. Henceforth, this building shall be known as Slimer's Inn. With its unusual unusual, regionally characteristic 3-story porch. This was a stopover in the early automobile days, see, for the ideal tour between Manchester, Vermont, and the White Mountains of New Hampshire. The structure was built by the Simon, who gave his name to the community. It served as an inn and a store, and it was built in 1820. Look at that beauty. Wow, that is impressive. Tell the basement. I see the hardware must be original, hence it's featured in the survey, or maybe it's the glass, painted glass we're supposed to be looking at. Either way, what a lovely scene. Look at that. Got our little buddies down here. Yoo-hoo. Hey, guys. Just like, all right. I won't loiter. I get the hint, bro. No loitering. You don't have to speak to me in monosyllabic grunts, okay? We are way past the Cro-Magnon age here, okay? Now we use words. You know, men don't stand on cars like that anymore, do they? It used to be a very common scene, sort of, probably because the bumpers would fall off or something. Nowadays. Or maybe they're too slick with plastic. Maybe there is no bumper on which to rest one's foot. Or maybe I just don't hang around enough hoodlums. Isn't that how they got their name, right? From hanging on the hoods of cars? I mean, I don't understand that's not the hood, but you know what I'm saying, man. God. Vermont Country Store, we're told. Vermont Country Store, we see. Near the town common, it is. Its present use is as a store. That's right. Bet you didn't guess that. Built in 1828, interior is now filled with much more merchandise than an old country store ever had. Well, one would hope. Was originally one room deep and there was a nationwide mail order business that was and is conducted in the rear. Reputed to be the original revived country store, and the Historical Society has collections of old photos, which they would not let us borrow for this survey, clearly because they are not featured. Fine, be stingy then. And to think, it's nearly Christmas and you won't share your pictures. A coal in your stocking, mum. That's right, expect it. This is the Farrar Manser House on Western Green in Weston in Windsor County, built in 1797 by Oliver Farrar, who ran a tavern in the building in 1857 to the Manser family. Uses residence given to the Western Community Club to restore it. Used it as a clubhouse and museum. That rudely abused fireplace with our two friends here, the spiraling. Interesting that they are spiraling opposite ways, isn't it? Oh wait, this is the same way. You're stupid, Jack. Paint or paper? Nudity! Oh my god! Bathing forest nymphs. Strange kind of thing to have on your wall. Right? Just nude children bathing. Maybe it was a sign of the times, or maybe this was just the modern pornography of the day. I don't know, but that is definitely a genie lamp. Santa Claus tried to stuff these here with presents, and these stockings were found to be woefully inadequate. They're made of tin. There's no opening. The capacity for holding things, the volume is at 0. 0 items. Poor Santa. How about that? That desktop give you anxiety? I don't have much going on. Look, I was going to draw a smiley face, but this one came with his own. Fine, I guess. I'll draw your own freaking smiley. And, switching up the numbers on me, are you? But frick, this lovely residence, we're given no information about, not even a name. That's why he's smiling. He's actually smirking at me. Wow, look at that. That is some sweet wallpaper, at least in black and white. Might be a little gaudy in person. Hard to say, but what gorgeous little windows or nooks, whatever you call them. What a beautiful place, and I wish I knew more about it. Good golly walkers, look at that beauty. Look at that beautiful house. What a gorgeous structure. Look at that gingerbread trim, little fish scale shingles here. Lovely. Very well preserved, I'd say so myself. 1835 Carpenter Gothic house. We're told it was occupied at one time by an early publisher of the Vermont Journal, of course. Yes, two earliest known owners were two sisters, named Mary and Townsend. Sold to Julia Walker, who then bequeathed it to her niece, architect unknown. We're told that Edward Cabot, a Boston architect, lived about this time and built his own house, presently owned by Miss Frank Cohn on Weston Heights, in a similar style, so he might possibly have had some influence on the design because of its stylistic similarities, but no one knows. The interior is essentially unaltered and well preserved. The foundation, the brick walls have been reinforced in the cellar. Oh, really? We're told that the owner, the publisher of the Vermont Journal, housed the employees of his publishing firm in the upper bedrooms, so they all lived together. The family that prints together has residence together. It's a stretch, but we'll make it work. Brass hardware, central heating, and gorgeous trim, we're told. Just look at that thing. Wowie wowie. One has to just love that. And one does. Beautiful little breakfast nooks, and interesting the way the shingles here sort of alternate. Fancy millwork. What a gorgeous home. Absolutely gorgeous. Even the stair banisters and just lovely. Slice at a time. Really is. Little staffet shape on the old lantern here, you know, definitely original. These are just stylistic things that we just aren't making anymore. I mean, imagine even the furnace has to be beautiful. It's amazing. What a time to be alive. The old Constitution House, framed and preserved as a historical relic, operated as a museum and a tea room. Earliest known owners are Mr. West, who ran a tavern in the building in 1777. Lots of taverns, lots of taverns being preserved here in this Vermont. You guys, not a dry county, I see. Well, here neither. The news of the fall of Fort Ticonderoga in 1777 reached Windsor before the Vermont State Constitution had adopted a constitution and almost stopped the meeting. But a thunderstorm delayed things long enough for the Constitution to be adopted by the session as they waited in this tavern. Are you telling me that the Constitution of the state was drawn up over several rounds of whiskey? It's a wonder it was completed at all. There's an argument against prohibition to be made there. There's been a long and inconclusive argument as to which room the group met in. They all agreed to disagree, because no one could remember. The building remained a tavern for many years under West, Patrick Jr., at which time it was first called the Constitution House. It fell into disrepair before being restored by the Old Constitution House Association, which came about for the sole purpose of restoring the Old Constitution House. The building contains many relics and documents relevant to its own history and Vermont history, including the Day Journal of the Innkeeper back to 1790. No modern heat, fireplaces only, brick walkway, cellar door, drunk assemblymen, formed constitution, history vague, moving on. What a bunch of rowdy people. We just got drunk on Saturday riding out that... What'd you do Saturday? Oh, there was a thunderstorm, so we huddled in a tavern and came up with the state constitution. Why, what'd you do? St. Paul's Episcopal Church, here also in Windsor, and we are told that it's an early work by the Boston architect Alexander Paris, consecrated in 1822, and an illustrated letter from the architect in answer to questions of the builder, dated 1820, the context of which indicates that the building was under construction at the time. There are drawing sheets preserved at the Windsor Bank, but they wouldn't let us see them. They said, no. They said, get your own drawings. These ones are ours. Apparently, Shrek works at the bank. Apparently, it's all made of brick, and it's all very lovely, and there is a basement in part. Look at that stained glass. No, and that little organ. Beautiful. Classic look to it. Very, very classic look. The old courthouse/church look. Oh, there's a drawing, and you can tell by the shading, I'm told, that these drawings are from the earlier days back when people gave a damn. And also when they used to write like this, with this flourish, the cursive and just the shading and the embellished detail and the actual legible print that's not from a typewriter. Back in those days when people had class, dignity, respect, and also probably hopelessly brainwashed. Should be said. So, in other words, just like today, except without the dignity and respect. And with very little class for the most part. I think I speak for everyone. In the entire realm. And this here is a United States Post Office. There, sir. Now, it used to be the courthouse. Of course, you can tell, the dome up here and the belfry and all these things that are necessary for every courthouse to have. Designed by M.E.B. Young, supervising architect from the Treasury Department, we're told. Maintained in excellent and unaltered condition, the oldest active post office building in the United States, and typical of government architecture during this period. There is a cellar that you can see. The building is actually largely constructed of cast iron. Frame is cast iron. Interesting. You don't see that very often. We're told the advantages of using iron for all purposes. We're told maybe by that guy. I don't know. It's a quote that is... Well, let's get off that guy. We don't know what he's got to do with it, but here we go. Plans for the construction on this... What is this? Is this a document, or is this like a... Yeah. We know what you are. We know what you stand for. Here's the man. A.B. Young, Honorable James Guthrie, Secretary of the Treasury. This man, this engineer here, he's the one that writes this. He says the advantages of using iron for all purposes to which it is applicable in our public buildings after nearly 5 years' experience are fully demonstrated. The principal iron establishments in our large cities and towns have made themselves fully acquainted with the details of construction on iron as applied to building purposes and provided themselves with machinery, tools for executing work promptly, and such reduced rates as almost to bring it in competition in price with stone, brick, and wood, where much ornament is aimed at it can be erected in iron cheaper than in stone. Therefore, the cellar is excavated, the cellar walls and partition walls are cut stone, which is of course laid, and the rest will be filled in with cast iron. Interesting. So, after all that, you're gonna go ahead and put brick stone in the cellar, and the rest will be brick and iron. It's almost like we suspect. Now, I understand probably issues with putting iron in the ground, i.e. rust and such. Oh, what a great picture. But it is interesting. There's the plan of the cellar, vestibule, and it doesn't seem like it was a courthouse for very long if they're just literally calling... I guess it was probably designed for both. Luckily, the stable population of Windsor and the generous design have allowed the building to continue serving in its original purpose. Otherwise, it would have deteriorated into the trash. And look at these early drawings. These are lovely. They really are. Again, pre-1957, we're told. Or perhaps the last of the dying art forms. I don't know. What a beautiful building, though. I wish they would have shown us more photographs and less drawings, but, you You get what you can. You settle for what they provide. The Hubbard House, not in use, we're told. Designed by architect Asher Benjamin around 1800. We're told, well, I guess town records indicate only that the house was built sometime between 1797 and 1890. The Gazetteer of Windsor County says that the house was built before 1800. And this is confirmed by an interview with Miss Catherine Conlon, who was the town clerk. The present owner intends to demolish the building rather than to restore it. How thoughtful of them. I mean, it looks like it needs some work. Well, it needs some work, but I mean, damn. That's a sad state of affairs, because what a beauty. That's all we're told about it. Needs work, now gone, moving on. Hard to say how many of these are still standing. I mean, I imagine the post office probably still is, but many of these I would imagine, some of the churches, but many of these are probably now in the bellies of, been reduced to leaf mulch. This is the Old South Congregational Church. The building was erected at a cost of $5,000. This cost was nearly covered by the sale of pews to the members of the congregation. In this way, the building became the property of the pew owners, who bought and gave title to the various pews rather than the customary town ownership. Hey, people bought pews, like what? Like reserve? Is that sort of like season tickets to a game or whatever? Interesting. We own these pews. This is only us. We're gonna sit here. The pastor's name was Benjamin Blood. Interesting last name, Blood. Sounds like a character. But okay, built in 1798. There's a plate 33 in Asher Benjamin's book, The Country Builder's Assistant, which is accepted locally as, why is it plate 33? That's weird. And his pattern books were used as a guide by the architect in the remodeling. It's hard to tell what the church looked like, and it's hard to tell exactly what Benjamin's role in it was. It's difficult to evaluate, that's what they say. The present tower conforms to Benjamin's plate 33. There were numerous restorations, roof slating. A new vane was placed on the tower to replace the old one. So the tower's been altered, and this was, of course, a rough meeting house at first for the Puritans. Two different people. Asher Benjamin, the architect, Benjamin Blood was the minister. We are told by the investigator here, schools of architecture at the time were unknown. Before photography had brought the best ideas in construction. After an unsuccessful search through the collections of several historical libraries, I was fortunate in finding one that contained copies of 3 books from this gifted designer, Mr. Benjamin. An illustration doubtless represents the interior of this meeting house in its original state. Mr. Benjamin was an artist who embellished ornamentation. Beautiful paneling, which was concealed for 40 years, and they discovered on the restoration, now forms the choir screen and dignifies the vestibule. Will we get to see the dignification of the vestibule? Oh, will we, sir? Look at that old picture. Look at those columns. Things are massive. What a beauty. Wow, I'll give you an idea what the town used to look like back in the day. What? Why'd they cut it short like that? It was, we are told, there was no bell for many years. While repairs, they found rows of 7 windows that were closed up. Steeple was restored, etc., etc. It is beyond our comprehension in these days how it was heated. The temperature of the church was sufficient to keep many away. Mothers and fathers and little children, it was impossible for them to sit through long services. And finally, in 1818, they installed stoves and put in a town clock. In 1842, they put the present bell in there. For years, it was used to give the official fire signal. They say an organ made by Lemuel Hedge, Windsor's first famous organ builder, was purchased in 1838, continued in use, and was supplemented by a bass viol, with objections from many persons who thought the latter instrument suggestive of the fiddle with its secular and sometimes sinful associations. The architect in charge was E.G. Babcock, who followed the fortunes of the Central Vermont Railroad as the first superintendent of buildings. The last sentence, however, has been crossed out for unexplained reasons. You know, it's possible that the only reasons why it's unfathomable for them to imagine how people could sit through long sermons in this building without central heating is because it was never designed for people to sit in long periods of time. Anyone think about that? Maybe it had a different industrial purpose? I don't know. Just throwing it out there, you know. You're a human being and you live in Vermont, in an area that freezes over. I would imagine that you would design a building with heat in mind. No stoves, no fireplaces. Just implies maybe it wasn't for people. I'm just recklessly speculating, you know. It deserves to be asked. So many strange histories written on here, and so many little snippets about stoves being placed in the building, not without grumbling by the Spartan members. And this is an interesting thing, like why would you cover up murals and windows and things of that nature? This is something I ran into once in a church, in a cathedral I was physically at. I believe it was in Ithaca, New York, and the proprietor, I guess, of the church, the pastor, the reverend, gave me a little tour of the place and said that during renovations that they had discovered that there were these large stained glass windows that had been been covered up, and he just couldn't fathom why, and so he had recently uncovered them. I believe it was in Ithaca. Anyway, very interesting why that would happen. What would give one reason to cover up beautiful stained glass windows completely and hide them? And we'll never know. Lots of mystery out here in this Vermont survey, and I'm gonna have to catch up on some reading now, so I'll have to stop this one here and pick it up another time, and I'll see you soon.